Go further. And Jeremy Robertson, who's hiding in line because the food is awesome. Woo, thank you, Workfront. And Jeremy is the lead instructor at DevMountain. One of the lead instructors, right? Or the lead instructor. The singular lead instructor. He had me change that on there to make it very specific. So with that, anything else I'm missing? All right, turn it over to Matt Winchester.
Thanks for that, Ryan. Can everyone hear me all right? We're good? Okay, all right. So let's just jump in here. So I was talking with my brother. My brother recently graduated from the University of Utah with a computer science degree, and he started working as a professional developer just this last summer. As I was talking to him, he would ask me lots of questions about what it's like to work at these companies as he's trying to feel out the company, kind of trying to feel out the processes in place, how to work on a team, all these things. And it got me thinking, like, hey, that's something that I bet you a lot of people probably would like to know, especially a lot of our new members of the workforce. Who has really gotten their first professional job, say, within the last year here? Okay, so we got some of you people. How about, like, who has been in the workforce maybe just 2 years doing professional JavaScript or Angular? Okay, all right, so we got some of you. So this is, I'm hoping to aim this at you, but really I think it's something that can benefit everybody as well. So first, like, what is this S-class thing, all right? So S-class is a concept, there's actually a few applications of it. I've heard, ever since I proposed the title, I've had lots of people come to me, oh, you meant this. Like, no, but actually that works. So Mercedes has like a S-class car, which is like their high tier one. That was one of the ones that came to me that I didn't know a lot about. I'm not a car person. I'm a JavaScript person. The place that I was referencing is I'm kind of a video gamer. I like to play games, and one of my favorite series is one called Fire Emblem, and Fire Emblem has these weapon rankings, and like an F weapon is like a terrible weapon, and then you can work all the way up to, you know, C, B, A. A is like a really good, but then they have these ones that are like the relics you search for in the corners of the world. They're the S class. They are the best of the best. It does not get better than an S class, except for a few times I've seen a double S class, which is just ridiculous. But so that's the idea, is S class. We're talking about how do you be that very top bit. Okay, all right. I'm not saying that I'm just like the best developer you all have ever met, and you all should be amazed that you're in my presence. What I am saying is, oh, thanks, Ryan. What I am saying, though, is that I have been doing this for a while. I've been developing professionally for over 11 years now, and what I have done is I have met a lot of people throughout the course of my career. And I've been able to learn from those people, and I hope I've adopted what they've shared through working with me really well. I've tried to. But the point is that from observing other people and trying to adopt it myself and reasoning about this stuff, I've come up with a list of things that I think really set apart the best of the best. Okay, as you might guess, there's no hard science to what makes an amazing developer amazing. It's not like they go into a lab and they get some test tubes and they're like, oh, that's what it is. It doesn't work that way. So what that means is this is a construction of me observing other people, talking to other people, and coming up with my own opinions. And that's really all that you can base something like this off of. You have your own opinions. That's great. I think that's one of the great things about a community, is that we can share these things and then we can hopefully all come together to a better understanding. So, warning, these are my opinions. Yours may differ. The expert developer at your place may have a different opinion. That's great. We can get together and we can talk and we can figure out what's best for all of us. So just keep that in the back of your head. So one thing an amazing developer has usually is really good skills, right? And we have all of these trainings that we do at meetups and at conferences and the like, where we talk about what are your skills? How can we develop your skills? Get better at Angular, get better at functional programming, get better at TDD, get better at doing CSS, or all sorts of these things. Skills are one set of things, and I'm going to entirely push that aside right now. Because even if you have the best skills in the world, The thing that really sets apart the best developers is their behavior. You can have somebody who is just rockstar hacker class, but if you can't work with him, if he can't work with your team, he's worthless. He's worthless. So the best part about this is that while this is what makes that S class, this is also, even if your skills maybe aren't at the top, you can still adopt these behaviors and kind of kick yourself up a notch. So this is why it's something that's applicable for everyone. So here we go. We're just going to go down and we're just going to talk about some of these things, and then if we have some time for some questions, we'll get some more opinions, and I think we'll have some fun. So all of these are phrased as an S-class developer will. So the first thing that an S-class developer does is they're value-focused. What does that mean? They understand that their job at the company is to provide value. That's why they give you a paycheck every however often they pay you. All right? If you're not doing this, then you're not doing your job. So the important thing is that this value drives all your other behaviors. Everything that you do should be delivering value, and that's why you're doing all these other things. If there's one underlying theme to all this, it's to bring value to your employer. And I realize that we like to talk about our skills and all the things that we like to do, but ultimately, we get paid to bring value to our employer. That's the thing that we do. Okay, so the first thing that we do to really bring value is to craft maintainable code. I like the word craft. I know I heard a talk by a CEO of another local company, and he was talking about how they call their software engineers craftsmen. The idea, when I think of a craftsman, it evokes the thought of somebody who takes time and attention to detail and making something look really good, right? So the idea of crafting maintainable code, the way I view it is that when you write code, you can optimize for many things. You can optimize for speed. You can optimize for memory performance. You can optimize for trips across the network, for battery consumption, for all sorts of things that you can optimize. And a lot of them are related in a lot of ways. The other thing that you can optimize for is maintainability. And while there's lots of times where you want to optimize for speed, the first thing you should always be optimizing for is maintainability. And then all the rest of it comes later. So we also hear this talking about premature optimizations. Premature optimizations makes unreadable, unmaintainable code, and it's very difficult to work with. And sometimes you did it so you could get a speed boost in something that gets called hardly ever, and it's not worth it. But it's really buggy. So you got to get lots of bugs in that area. The questions I like to ask myself when I'm doing this is I ask myself, hey, when somebody else looks at this code, are they going to be able to know what's going on? How long will it take them to figure out what this is supposed to be doing? There are lots of things that you can do to be able to encourage good maintainable code. Good variable naming is a good case. Good use of white space is another one. Comments is a balancing act. Too many comments can be bad. Some comments are good. But ultimately, the real goal is look back at it and think, if I was a brand new developer, could I figure out what this code means, assuming I have knowledge of JavaScript? And frankly, sometimes it's your own self that you're protecting. I don't know how many times I've come back to code that I've written, and I have no idea what it's doing, and I wish I had written it in a more maintainable form. Oh yeah, and this is a great place where I love doing code reviews. I'm a big fan of code reviews. Not necessarily of a big formal process where you have a meeting or anything like that, but the idea of having, whenever I'm preparing code to go to production or to be used by someone else, I have someone else look at it first. That principle, I think, is great, and I think there's a lot of value in it. There's value for the person who's getting code reviewed, and there's value for the person who's reviewing it. So a lot of value out of good code reviews, and they can really help you make sure that your code is actually maintainable. Okay. One of the things that I've noticed people on teams have trouble with is sometimes when they're trying to manage expectations and they have a manager who's coming down and saying, hey, where's this thing I wanted? You know, oh, I'm working hard on it. It's a 6-month project, and I'm sorry, I don't have anything to show you yet. But it's been 3 months, and it can be really frustrating. So while it's not always possible, as much as you can to choose how you're tackling your work. to choose which pieces you take off first, how you divide it up in such a way that you can deliver stuff as soon as possible. Another way to say this would be to have a bias to release your code. So you want to be trying to release as regularly as possible, because then when your manager comes to you, or rather they won't be coming to you asking where it is, because they'll already see that there's value. And you can say, hey, look, this is what we did last month. We released this, this, and this. We reached these milestones. Instead of being like, well, we're still working on that project. It helps to show that value that you're providing the organization. Yeah, okay. Frequently as possible. Right, and so the end result of that is that you try to do small deliverable chunks, and that's really the best way to handle it from my own perspective as I'm trying to reason about what it is that I'm doing, is that it's a small chunk, then I can really understand the ins and outs of it. When I'm doing this large thing, it's like, well, I understand it from this view, but I really don't understand all the other workings of it. When it's a small deliverable chunk, I can really make sure I understand it well. Okay, this is one I've been guilty of in my career. Do you guys understand what I mean when I say over-architect? Who understands it? Okay. Heck yes. Okay, I ask it first, and I just see a bunch of people looking, so I don't know. Okay, over-architecting means that really you're planning ahead for problems that haven't arisen yet. That's basically what it means. So I kind of have developed my own rule of thumb, and it served me well throughout my career, about when it is that you have reached the point that you've architected enough. Which is this something I can add later? Would that make things harder, right? So let's say I'm setting up a database, and I'm setting up what my model looks like, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to worry about some tracking audit logs maybe later or something like that. It turns out maybe that a data migration might be really painful down the road. And a little bit of foresight, I can get ahead of that, and it won't be so painful for me. But there are some times where I'm just pulling out things and I'm making abstractions, and I make a factory for this or whatever, and it's not really solving any actual problem right now. It's only solving a perceived problem that I think we could have down the road. And if it's something that I could easily do later, then why do it now? Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, like the example I gave with the database, there's some times where that's what you need. Okay, don't write clever code. This is an interesting one because it seems a little counterintuitive. We like to show off how clever we are and how smart we are, and I think of like the Perl programmer who managed to write like a whole web server on one line or something like that, right? Like, look how clever I am, all these tricks I did to make it work. Well, that's great. I mean, you're really smart. That's awesome that you can do that. But good luck fixing a bug in that thing a year from now, because that is going to be impossible to work with. And typically, I've found when I try to be clever, I outwit myself. And I come back later, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be fine. And then I forget the little gotcha that I did because I was so clever, right? So don't be clever. Be explicit in your code. Make it so that it's easy to understand what's going on. It really comes back to the maintainable code at that point. Okay, this one's an important one. And this can vary from company to company, right? Everyone has different roles and they get assigned different things. The way that I like to think about it is we have managers and team leads and such, and their job is to make good business decisions from a technical standpoint. A lot of times our job as engineers is to be precise and to use data and to present as accurately as we can to those decision makers what the situation is. So an example I had a while back, we were analyzing a possible performance issue during a release, and it was a feature I was trying to get out. And I was working with one of our principal engineers, really bright guy I respect a lot, and he helped me as I was trying to prove that my feature wasn't causing this performance issue. He helped me take that objective stance and just purely from the data saying, okay, well, in order to demonstrate that, we're going to want to run a test this way. And we're going to want to make sure it has this sort of load. And we're going to want to make sure the server is behaving like this. And then we craft the data together and we can give it to the managers in a way that like, hey, look, just here's the data. Here's what the data says. I'm not getting it emotional. The other side of that is if the data had said my feature was at fault, then I should own up to that. And I should say, look, the data says that we shouldn't turn this on. So that's my recommendation. Here's the data that I collected to show that. Like I said, every organization is a little different. I think the trends in the industry are that developers are becoming more and more of decision makers. So to some extent, you have to do this process internally with yourself. But again, having an objective look, especially with data, and removing emotions from the situation really can help you and assist you as you're trying to help make those decisions or advise someone in making a decision. Should we delay the release? Yeah. All right. Here's one that, again, seems a little counterintuitive. If I'm such an awesome S-class developer, I should know everything, right? Wrong. That's not how it works. I have met many very smart, intelligent, talented developers, and one thing that they all have in common is there's something they don't know. All of them. There's some technology they've never used before or never heard of before. There's just too many out there. So saying that you don't know something is okay. What's not okay is trying to feign like you have knowledge that you don't. It leads people astray, it causes people to make bad decisions, gets you off in the weeds. One of the stigmas sometimes that people have about saying something like, I don't know how that works, is that means that the person is unintelligent or incapable or something like that. And I just want to completely dispel that myth right now. That it is okay to say that you don't know something when you don't know something. How else are you going to learn if you don't admit, at least to yourself, that you don't know it? And right, and then, so the one thing that I like to, I'm glad I had that point there that reminded me. Sometimes I encounter stuff, especially right now, as Ryan said, I work on the architecture team at Workfront. And a lot of times we tackle a problem, and we know what the problem is, but we really don't know how we're going to solve it. Or maybe we don't even completely understand why this problem is happening the way it is. And there's really some research that needs to go into it. And so we talk about deliverable chunks, referring to earlier. One of the things that we can do as a deliverable chunk is to research it. Have a question. One of the things I like to do is every task item that we pull into one of our iterations has a definition of done. And so our definition of done could be figure out why this problem is happening. Or it could be come up with a proposal for a better way to do this. It's not always necessarily code the thing and ship it, right? It can be, there's lots of other things. And a lot of times it's getting that knowledge that you don't have because you're honest with yourself and you realize you don't have it. Okay. Put the business first. This is a great one for being able to work with other people in your organization. If you think about a company, a typical company, you have the CEO at the top. The CEO's job, generally speaking, is to steer the ship. To say, hey, look, this is the market, water's out here, we think we can own that space. Everybody on this side, row 30%, everyone on this side, row 50%, we're going that way, right? And he leads the effort. He points the ship. And he sets those goals. You can then take that direction, and if you listen closely, if you have a good CEO, you'll hear what that direction is. You can then take that direction, and then whenever you are making a decision or an argument about what you should or shouldn't be doing with your time, you can construct it in a way that is relative to the goals of the company, right? So whenever you have a disagreement, like, well, I think we should be working on this feature instead of that one, you can frame it in the context of, well, they've really said that we need to work hard to go after the custodial market or something like that, right? We got to work hard to go after this market, and based on the research and our own internal experts, this feature looks like it has a better chance of fulfilling their needs. Let's work on this one. But because you framed it in context of what the company wants together, theoretically everyone's on board with that. You may find in your experience not everyone is, but at least on the surface they should agree with you when you start framing things that way. It also means that you need to be honest with yourself, though. Don't have an agenda. Don't have things that pet projects that you feel like need to be done just because it would help you more in your career. It's something that you just want to do. I know a place this comes up a lot is picking a framework. and there's all these lovely framework wars. Oh, I want to do Angular. I want to do React. I want to do Ember. Okay, no one wants to do Ember. But but we draw it out, and in the end, it's like, well, what matters for the customer? What matters for what our CEO has set that our direction is? Let's figure out what's going to get us going towards that the fastest, and that's the thing we should be doing. Okay. All right, yeah. And then if you're wrong, and it's not what the business wants, get in line. Okay, all right. Trying to hurry up here. Seek others' opinions. You do not have to be the person who knows everything. The idea is that as a team, your collective is greater than just the sum of your parts, right? That together, you can come up with ideas that any one of you couldn't have come up with on your own. And I know I've experienced that many times throughout the course of my career. You don't have to be responsible for every great idea. You can give credit to others, and you can still be successful in your career. Oh yeah, I want to say this one word for word because I like this one, because I thought it up, right? A developer who can recognize a good developer is more valuable than a developer who can only come up with them, right? Then the bank of ideas you have to draw from is much more broad than just your own head. Okay. Similarly related to this, you will want everyone to succeed, everyone that you work with. So an example of this, right now, like I said, I work on our architecture team. I support a number of product teams at our company. And each product team is made up of back-end developers, front-end developers, a manager, a UX designer, a product manager, some QA, and together they own a portion of the product. And they are responsible within them to see how successful it's going to be. My job on my team is to help all those teams be successful in owning and improving their areas. So I'm okay with another team having a big success and not having my name up in the headlights, right? I'm okay with allowing others, because in the end, that's how the company succeeds, is by everyone succeeding, not by one person trying to hog the spotlight or people trying to backbite each other. Okay? Rock stars are overrated. That's one of the things. Unless they know how to work with other people, just because you're a rock star and you're really good at this doesn't mean that you're adding a lot of value to the company. One of the things I like is that my job, especially in architecture, is not to tell everyone how to do their job. It's to help them understand the problems, help propose solutions, but really empowering them to solve their own problems. As you become more influential within your organization, you'll find that you become a point that people come to ask you questions, and remembering this perspective can greatly assist you as you try to do that. Oh yeah, and again, like, that doesn't mean being helpful to someone who's trying to subvert the way that the company should be going. If they're off base, call them out. That's great, but I really think that what you're doing probably isn't in line with where the company's trying to go. Something like that. Okay, be friendly. Holy cow, this is one that sometimes can be hard in the developer community. Although there's actually a lot of really friendly people out there. Sometimes I think actually the stereotypes that we receive in this industry are actually unfair. There's a lot of really great friendly people that I've met. But it's important to be approachable. If you're going to succeed as a team, then you need your team to be able to work with you. So you have to be approachable. The business needs you to be approachable. So unless you're completely on your own, it doesn't matter how big a genius you are if people can't work with you. And if you're on your own, then great, enjoy that. And don't belittle people, just be a good person. Okay, be confident. So one of the things that can be difficult, and I know is one that I have suffered from at times, is I'll be in a meeting and we'll be exploring options of what we can do. Sorry, I'm almost out of time here. We'll be exploring options of what we can do, and there'll be a question about, well, I think this feature works that way. And I'm trying to recall off the top of my head. And I'm pretty sure I know what it is. But sometimes I shy away, and I'm just like, well, I think this is how it works, but I really need to go check the code. But if you really know something, stand up for it. Be confident. Be like, no, this is how the feature works. I know, I worked on it. I lived and breathed that thing for 6 months. So you just own up to it and say, hey, look, be confident about what you're doing. The thing that you don't want to, though, is to be, relates to being willing to say, I don't know. No false confidence. Bravado doesn't really make up for not knowing, and it does no one any favors. We're getting close to the end. Okay, this is kind of related to some of the other stuff. One of the things that an S-class developer will do is they will be objective about what it is that they're doing. They'll detach themselves from agendas. They'll detach themselves from emotions as best as possible. Not that we're robots, but when it comes to doing the work, we try to be objective about what's best for the company. You check your ego at the door. You decide what's best, and you move fearlessly towards that. Even if that means that you don't get to use React or whatever it is, right? I speak like that because I feel like I encounter a lot of developers who, if they can't use their favorite framework, then it's just, oh, my life's terrible. I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of really great tech companies here, and they have a lot of great perks. They have a lot of great people. They have great culture. There's so much better than just what framework we use. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, being able to use a framework you enjoy is important, and it is a luxury we enjoy that as developers we're in demand enough that we can kind of pick and choose. But let's not forget that there are some companies out there that are downright terrible to work for, and they may have your pet framework, but it's really not worth it. So just some perspective, and also, again, like I said, be objective. All right, being flexible. This kind of relates to a lot of the earlier ones, but if it's not in line with the company objectives, or if the company objectives change, be willing to change with it. If the technology that you had been betting on was looking so great, and then you come across as something in its code base that's like, oh crap, maybe this isn't the best decision anymore as you're exploring it, be willing to roll with the punches. Be willing to look back at what is best for your team, for your organization, for your company. Right, so maybe that means you can't use Flexbox. Crap, that sucks. I love Flexbox. I think it's great. It's not something that we've been able to support. Although IE8 is dead today. Does anyone want to? So that's something. Watch out, 8, 9, and 10, right? Unless you're on Vista. Vista still has 9 for now. But so that's great. That's something we can celebrate. Wow, I just realized I'm speaking on that day. I feel special now. That dependency won't be ready in time. Yeah, so like you're depending on something from another team. Have to shift priorities. Okay. The last one, and this is one that I live in this world a lot, is the things that I produce, other teams consume, kind of like I said before. There's this attitude sometimes, though, that happens, like I finish this, and they call it pitching it over the fence. And you just give it to them and you say, hey, here's your thing. You can use this, and it should all just work just fine, and I got other stuff to do now, so enjoy, right? It's kind of like you went to a ice cream parlor or something, and you said, hey, could I get this ice cream on this sundae with all this stuff on top, and they give it to you, and then you're done, right? We're not an ice cream parlor. We are a team that works collaboratively together. And so that means when you put something out there, you provide documentation, you provide training, you provide support for people who have issues. You stand behind your work is really what it means. Okay, so throwing things over the fence. I've done all of these different things. I've done trainings for new stuff I've recorded screencasts. I've written up documentation. It's funny, as you progress in your career, you think that you spend all this time coding, but how much of the rest of your time you spend doing all this other stuff? Be willing to sit down with people, explain your reasoning, be willing to take their feedback to improve what you're working on. I like to think of it as customer support, really. The way I think of it at Workfront, at least, with our product groups, is that they're my customers. And I need to keep my customers happy. Otherwise, I go out of business, aka I have to find a new job. So that's how I look at it, and I found that people who have that attitude, that it helps them be successful. So those are the main points I wanted to go over. Does anyone have any questions or anything? Do we have time for questions, Ryan? Yeah? No? No questions? Okay. All right, well, thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Quick announcement. For those of you who can eat 2 burritos or 3 salads, get in line again because there's plenty of food. That's all.
Try to get my food.
Okay, can everyone hear me? No? Don't tease me, Nate. Okay, I like games. So we're going to start off playing a game. Everyone has to raise their hands. If you just ate a large dinner, leave your hand up. If you're sitting in a chair, leave your hand up. If you've worked all day and you're already tired, leave your hand up. Okay, if your hand's up, you're eligible to play this game. The game is last person to fall asleep wins. I'm totally in the running. My hand is up, so get your non-lethal instruments ready. If I start dozing, you put your hands down. Joke's over. Okay. Angular 2. Angular 2 is officially in beta, right? There's some cheers, some clappings. We'll see if you still feel that way at the end of the presentation, right? We'll see if the cheers got louder or softer. And we'll send the feedback to the Angular team. I won't take it personal. I didn't write it. Okay, Angular 2. Today I hope to cover why Angular 2 exists, what it does, we're going to go over the syntax a bit, the different things that you can do with it, how it approaches and solves some of the same patterns that we're used to on the web, and we're going to talk about how you use that syntax and also how you can start working Angular 2 into your app, your Angular 1 app, if you feel like that's the best approach for your company. Angular 2 is pretty different. If you were just kind of expecting Angular 1 with a little bit of makeup and a bit of polish here and there, it's not going to be that. There are some pretty big changes in Angular 2. Personally, they're changes that I'm excited about. I've read the reasonings why they've made some of these changes. I've tried to keep up with it, and I think they're coming from a logical and good perspective. There's good reasons behind the changes. There's good reasons to embrace the change, to see where that can take us. Why the changes? To give you a bit of an overview. Angular was first developed in 2009. What was the web landscape as far as libraries in 2009? We had nowhere near the plethora we have now. How many of you were actually coding JavaScript in 2009? There's more than I expected. Okay, these are the dinosaurs. We should all applaud for them. The real troopers who coded JavaScript when it was painful and terrible to do. I'm sorry, I shied away from that when I graduated. It was not fun. It's much better now. So, back then we kind of had Knockout, Backbone, jQuery, and then along came HTML5 and it opened up a whole new range of options. Simply by adding that one data attribute specification in the HTML opened up so many doors. Since then, we've got a lot of new things that have come along, things that did not exist when Angular was first developed and they were making major framework decisions. ES6, isomorphic rendering. For those that don't know what that is, that's basically pre-render on the server without data, very fast. Give it to the client. They're like, ooh, something's happening. This feels so great. And then you get all your data, you make your changes, push it back down, and it just seamlessly slips into place because it was already rendered about how it was supposed to be. It feels really good for the users. It's picking up steam. We've got more complex web applications than we did in 2009, right? In 2009, I'm pretty sure MySpace was still a thing, right? I know, it feels like forever, but it's really not. Web components and an explosion of useful JavaScript libraries. These are all things that Angular 1 has a difficult time really bringing in and integrating into its system because they made design decisions before these things existed. This kind of put Angular 2 in a position, the team, to say, well, they eventually decided that Angular 1X had to have a shelf life so that they could create a new framework that they could embrace a lot of these new and exciting things. When you build a web application, you can break it down into two parts. Really simply, yes, you go far more fine-grained than this. But in general, to build web apps, we've got to be able to deal with the DOM, and we've got to be able to deal with data. And we've got to make the two play nicely. So we're going to kind of look at it from those two perspectives. The DOM, anyone feel like the DOM's kind of like this? Right? Especially those dinosaurs, they're like, oh man, flashbacks. This is what it used to be like. But Angular 1X, React, all these libraries have come along to make templating the DOM, changing it, manipulating it dynamically based off of data so much easier. Angular 1X was really kind of more like this than anything. Right? How many of you feel like Angular 1X was 50% magic? You're like, I don't really know how or why it's doing it, but I follow the pattern and it works. Right? True story. If you don't feel that way, you probably haven't done enough. Or you're smarter than me. It's probably the second one. Okay. So, interacting with the DOM by Angular 2. Components. Components are how things are built in Angular 2. We've got a really basic component here. We're going to use what we're calling a decorator. That is the term for that @ symbol, where it says, I need to do this. This is going to get really tiring. Maybe alternate back and forth. So, you've got that @ symbol, @ component. It's a decorator. It is adding meta information to a class. How many of you heard the term class in JavaScript? Great. I know who's looked into ES6, because it's that, right? Nothing fancy and new. The simplest comparison is to think of the class section like a controller in Angular 1X. And then above it, we're going to add some meta information to say, okay, we got a controller, but tied to this controller, here's a selector, like a directive name or a name for another controller in your application. This is what we're going to refer to it by. We're going to refer to this thing as my app. Secondly, we're going to give it a template. You can also use a template URL. Who's a fan of not having HTML in their JavaScript? Yay! See? So you can use template URL. We leave it here because it's really easy to see. You'll also notice that we're still using good old double mustache brackets. One-way binding. Still there, still works. So here it's looking for the my hero property on my class. So this is going to render and say my favorite hero is Windstorm, because it finds the property on the component, renders it in the template. This should not feel like a huge stretch, right? We've kind of just shifted the pattern a little bit. We're used to declaring properties in a controller, referencing them in the template, and being able to do something with it. Template bindings. In Angular 1X, they had over 40 built-in directives. ng-click, ng-if, ng-show, ng-hide, ng-class, ng-cloak, etc., etc., etc. In Angular 2, they have 5. Okay? And that is because they have decided, why are we writing all these directives to just change properties on an HTML element? So what they've done is they've given us the square bracket syntax. This is effectively saying, I want a one-way binding to this property in the HTML from my component, from my class. So, ng-show and hide. Does anyone know? And the students that have attended my classes better know this. ng-show and hide, what does it manipulate on the DOM? Huh? Display, the display property. We don't need it. Do square brackets around style.display and change the value. Almost anything that you could do with Angular 1 directives, you can do using this, because that's all Angular 1 directives were doing. We're manipulating properties on the DOM in a lot of cases. So now we're going to do it more explicitly. This is one of my favorite things about Angular 2. It's removed the magic of this third-party directive layer, where you have to know the DOM, and you got to know how the Angular way, and you got to use it. No. You know the DOM, you know the properties, you manipulate the properties. Done. Magic, gone. Right? Square brackets to a property, change that property. This also opens a lot of doors, because it means a lot of things that there weren't directives for in Angular 1x, we don't need them. There's property in the DOM, we got it. Let's do it. We can bind to nested properties, as you can see, and we can also update styles and classes. So the third line there, square brackets all around class.extra sparkle. This is basically a simple ng class. Right? I'm going to apply the extra sparkle class if is delightful is truthy. Don't need ng class. Update a class. Here's the class name. It's pretty straightforward, and it carries a lot of power. That covers one way. It is worth noting that everything in Angular by default is unidirectional. If you really liked two-way bindings, I'm sorry, they're more or less dead. For good reason, performance. So, if we want to handle a click event, we use parentheses. So square bracket means I'm going from my component to update a property on the DOM. Parentheses means I'm going to take an event, a DOM event, and I'm going to evaluate an expression that goes back to my component. That first line is ng-click. When I click on that button, invoke the read rainbow function on my component. Again, we had all of Angular's built-in directives. We don't need them. Any DOM event, we can wrap in parentheses and point it back to our component and handle that event. Double-click, click, mouse enter, mouse leave, blur, etc. Right? Now you can see how they're able to drop so many directives, because you have all the power of just saying, I know HTML, I know the DOM, link it up to a component using square braces or parentheses. If you really, really need to, you can do two-way binding by doing both parentheses and square brackets. But I like the syntax because it's going to make you think, do I really need this to go both ways? The less we do, the less side effecting we have, the less chance we have of, oops, I didn't mean for that to happen, bugs. They're also giving us the ability, by using a hashtag, to specify a variable in the HTML. Pretty straightforward. We've got our video. We named it Movie Player. And if we click on the button, it's going to invoke movieplayer.play. This pattern will hopefully really simplify that. And many of you have written nested directives and got lost in the spaghetti mess of links into controller chains into requires and trying to get the data from the top to the bottom and everyone in the middle is happy. No, just do something like this. And you can very easily say, hey, I know I'm inside of a parent directive. It's got a name. Invoke this function when you do something on me. It also puts more declarative syntax in the HTML for actions like that, to make it easier to keep track of who's working with who and for how many cookies. Okay, the star. This is less of a bonus feature and more as something you need to know. The Angular 2 team has decided that any directive or component that will manipulate a template and add or remove to the DOM needs to be prefixed with a star. This will help improve performance and a few other important things. If we dive into that just a little bit, these are doing the exact same thing. The bottom example is how Angular is manipulating the DOM. They're taking your code and wrapping it in HTML's template tag, which basically says, I have a template, I may or may not put it here. I don't know, but it's a template that I might use. So by using the star, it's basically shortcut for writing the second way. They're doing the exact same thing. We're developers. If we're good developers, we're lazy developers. And that means succinct, to the point, the pattern is good. All right. Let's cover the few built-in directives that Angular does have. The first one is ngIf. This was included because there is no HTML property that says, don't even put this on the DOM. So Angular's like, well, it was really good. There's good times to use ngIf. They left it in. Works just like it does now. If expression is truthy, it's not put on the DOM. ngSwitch for conditional layouts. If you use switch statements or ngSwitch, it works pretty much the same, a little bit of syntax tweaking. ngClass, the main value to ngClass is when you have multiple classes and you want to bind it to an object on your component. The property name, active and disabled, those property names, those are the class names that will be applied if their values are truthy. So active will be applied if my component has a property called isActive that is truthy. It will add a class called active to that element. ngFor, probably one of the strong points of Angular, declarative way to do lists. No for loops, appending, or anything like that in the HTML. This is replacing ngRepeat. And it is for of, not ngRepeat in. This brings it more in line with ES6, which is why it is named in this way. So, ngFor, the other thing that you need to notice in the ngFor is that our variable is prefixed with a £. One of the things the Angular 2 team was really trying to do is get things to be more consistent. I'm sure anyone who's developed Angular knows there's those few directives that you go use them and they work different than the other directives. And you're just like, what was the pattern for this one? It's the odd one. I don't remember. You got to go look it up and wrestle with it to get it to work. So in Angular 2, the team has really tried to get to be consistent. We have a variable in HTML, so we prefix it with a hash. So we prefix it with a hash, but then we can use it just like we would in ngRepeat, double mustache, to show our hero ID and our hero name inside of that element. Nested components. One of the biggest changes that's going to be taking place in Angular 2 is they are moving to a nested web component tree structure. If you've studied React, you're going to be right at home. If you haven't, this is going to be a design learning curve for you. The main two things that I want you to see on this slide is right near the top, it's bringing in a hero detail component. And then in our @component section, it has directives that is an array of directives. Another thing Angular 2 is doing is forcing us basically to be more explicit about what we mean all the time or what we wanted to use all the time. In HTML, if you make up an element name, it pretty much ignores that element name and treats it like a div. In Angular 2, they do the exact same thing. Without passing hero detail component into the directives here, if we had HTML that said hero detail component that looked like a directive in HTML with the element name, it's just going to ignore it and think it's a div. Because it's going to be like, hey, the parent didn't have any directives called hero detail component. I have no idea what you want. It's going to be a bit more work for us to be explicitly declaring the children of parents that need to be rendered. But the value is we don't have to worry about naming conflicts. Angular 1 does have like a global directive name. You can't have the same directive name the same thing, or two directives name the same thing. Here, doesn't matter. You're going to import the exact one you want, call it whatever you want, and pass it in, and it's just going to know the right one to use because you were more explicit. So it is going to be a bit more work, but it gives us more power and more control on the lower level, and it makes sure we don't accidentally the code. Other thing on this slide to point out, we're bringing in on init. This is an important gotcha that I just remembered I didn't put on my gotcha slide later, so I'm going to bring it up now. Don't do any data initialization in a constructor in Angular 2 ever. It will silently fail and break terribly and give you no help. They have added an on-init function that is to be used after when you actually want to like get data and start initializing things and getting things ready. All you should do in the constructor, take any values you got and assign them. Nothing else. Don't kick off any calls to get data. It will not work. Okay, that's a quick run through of Angular's primary toolkit to manipulate the DOM. There are a few things in here that I've kind of skipped, but this probably covers 80-90% of the tools that you've got. We went through that pretty fast. The learning curve for Angular 2, in my opinion, is not going to be in learning the API. It is going to be in learning the new patterns and the new thought process for how to structure an app and share data. Let's dive a bit into how it handles data and services. The first thing worth noting, Angular 2 was written using TypeScript. Most of the examples, many of the examples out there are using TypeScript. If you are a shop that plans to use Angular 2 and absolutely doesn't want to use TypeScript, I would love to hear your reasoning. Maybe I'm a little biased, but the team has basically said TypeScript is the best way to use our library. So, consider it. For those that don't know TypeScript, here's a super quick overview. On the right, we have JavaScript. It's a function that takes in a parameter called greeting. On the left, we have a function that takes in a greeting, but we add :string. All we're saying is our greeting parameter needs to be a string. That means if you pass in an object, TypeScript will go, this wasn't a string. Someone was going to do string stuff to it, but they're going to do it to an, nope, and it's going to tell you early before you run the app. On the left, on the right, again, you can see kind of more of a class structure in ES5. And then in ES6 or TypeScript, we have the greeter on the left hand, on your right hand side, my left, which should look like an ES6 class with a few :strings here and there to say this needs to be a string. A lot of power is built into the Angular 2 framework for those that use TypeScript. Anyone ever like made a code change, refresh, gulp or whatever, reloaded the browser, logged in, navigated the page, pushed a button, and then saw on the console a typo? You're like, man, there's 3 minutes for one typo. TypeScript can really help catch those things earlier and faster. So be prepared to hear about TypeScript all the time when you hear about Angular 2. Whether or not you use it, that's your call. But be prepared to hear about it and read examples in it and be able to read it and understand it. So here's an example of a service in Angular 2. In Angular 2, there really isn't this concept of service and factory and provider, which is great because that pattern was very meh, right? Always confusion, always like why, really? You could use one just like the other. And so there's kind of one path to do a service in Angular. The first, this is every line but one is an ES6 class in this file. Can anyone spot the one line that's not ES6? That's still part of ES6. Yeah, it's the @injectable. That decorator with the @ symbol. That is a TypeScript thing. This is really awesome to me because we're just writing JavaScript code to do logic, which means we could delete that one line of code and use this class anywhere. There is literally no hook or dependency on Angular. We can put all our business logic in ES6 classes and have them be totally safeguarded against a CTO who wants to move over to the new hotness, right? Or we put them all in ES6 classes, and when the new hotness comes along, we're like, we don't have to rewrite 75% of our business logic because it's still just JavaScript, right? This is a great thing in my opinion. But we do have to tag it as injectable. And that is so that when we do this next part, we are importing that hero service that we just made, and in the component of our app, we're adding a provider's property and saying, here is the hero service. If someone else wants a hero service, use this guy. It is also important to note that it will treat this as a singleton. It will make one instance and give that same instance to everybody. If you want multiple instances, use the new keyword. You get multiple instances. Very JavaScript. The last thing for a service is in the component that wants to use it. In the constructor, we use TypeScript and say :hero service. Give me something that I'm calling hero service that is a hero service. Angular is going to be like, hey, yep, someone registered an add injectable that was a hero service. I got one of those. Here you go. Very JavaScript. Big thumbs up from me. Okay, HTTP. This one's worth bringing up. This should look a lot like HTTP. Right near the middle there, we've got our constructor that's saying I'm asking for an HTTP thing that is of type HTTP. Angular's going to dependency inject that for us because it's built in. We didn't have to do any of the other steps. And then we use it. HTTP.get. Looks just like our current code. The difference in the gotcha is that HTTP in Angular 2 does not return a promise. It does not return a JavaScript promise. It is returning what we call an observable. Matt is a big fan. Yes, me as well. I will also give it a clap. Observables, in short, are like super promises. Okay? This is a really simple example. We're doing a map, so we're going to manipulate the data a little bit, and then we're doing a subscribe to get the data out of HTTP and put it on our service itself. That's all this example is doing. Not too much of a learning curve, but as you dive into observables, one of the best places to deep dive into observables is learning RxJS. It will supercharge your data manipulation. Really powerful. Okay, some gotchas. This one I don't know if this is intentional and they're going to leave it or they just haven't got to it yet because it's in beta, but Angular 2 will simply not throw errors and be completely silent and let things be broken. Personally, I don't like that. If it's broken, bloody tell me, please. But there are times where it will give you a silent error. So as it is right now, if you're diving into Angular 2, I highly recommend taking the time to thoroughly follow the tutorials and read the docs so that you don't miss the little details that will get you silent errors and you have no idea why things aren't working. One of the main examples of that is that a browser ignores HTML tags and attributes that it doesn't recognize, and so does Angular. That's in quotes because it's off their website. They're saying that, not me. Often the way to fix that is add that directives property to the component metadata and say, here, you now know about this directive. Without that, silent. No errors, things just don't work. You're like, why doesn't it work? And because you forgot that. So hopefully, in my opinion, hopefully they fix it. Stars are an important part of certain directives. I think this is going to be, in my opinion, a potential pain point of Angular 2. When do I use the star? When do I not? Right? Like diving into that could be a little tricky to get our brains around. Many of the examples are in TypeScript. Like I said before, if you don't know it, plan on learning how to read it if you're going to work in Angular 2. Providers are nested, or the services. When we made that service, we registered it on a provider's property. So when I say providers are nested, I basically mean we can have a component that we say, here's your hero service, and then we go down a level and we say, hey, here's your hero service, and they're two completely different services because we over-registered. So we can shoot ourselves in the foot, but it could also be beneficial because there may be a time where we want to use a default hero service, but we get down a few levels into this page and we want a special hero service, right? Because it's for the insiders' actual heroes club. So we can override it and use a completely different service. It could go both ways. And HTTP gives you an observable, not a promise. There's definitely going to be a bit of a learning curve around that one. All right, last section, prepping for the move from Angular 1X to Angular 2. Almost all of these slides are straight out of their documentation. I just condensed it into a very quick to get through presentation. But it means that you're going to have really easy references to go to their docs, and hopefully they're going to already feel a little bit familiar to you. So they have a whole massive, humongous page on how to migrate effectively. So the first step for migrating from 1x to 2x is ask your boss for a whole day to read this page. It's very large. Migrating to TypeScript. I know we've said TypeScript a whole bunch, right? Some of you are like, oh, TypeScript. And some of you are like, yay, TypeScript. And most of you are like, oh, TypeScript. So, one of the main benefits in typed languages, which is where TypeScript comes from, C#, Java, it's a typed language. You have to explicitly declare types on everything. JavaScript is special. But it really helps with refactoring. Using TypeScript in 1x before you start moving anything can tell you when you screwed up the migration and really save you a lot of time tracking down those issues. 2, start using require or import in your code. If you are not using require or import, you are behind the times. You're playing catch up. That's not a TypeScript thing, that's an ES6 thing, and everybody is moving that way thing. If you don't understand require import, that should be one of your top things on your list to understand just to get caught up with where the web is at right now. Please. So, using that will already get you one step closer to being able to do things the Angular 2 way, which is really just the ES6 JavaScript way as far as sharing code. Plus, the major benefit of this, if this isn't a selling point, I don't know what is. 300 JavaScript files in your index.html page, no thank you. Right? With import, you can sidestep almost all of that really easy. Okay, write components using directives. I've kind of shown you the component structure. On the next slide, I'm going to show you the actual code on how to do this. But it's really easy. Write a directive. It uses a template URL. It uses controller with controller as syntax. It has an isolate scope, and you nest your directives and pass data along. You're doing the Angular 2 data flow way in Angular 1. Really easy to just delete a few lines of code, change some names, and bam, you've got an Angular 2 component because you wrote things this way. The last thing is to use the upgrade adapter. The Angular team put a lot of time into making the Angular adapter, the upgrade adapter. What is it? It's basically a way to run Angular 1 and Angular 2 in the same app side by side. Angular 2 can use Angular 1 services. Angular 1 can use Angular 2 services. You can swap directives and components and pieces to your heart's content. They've made it so that if you're willing to put in the work, you can start writing Angular 2 without trying to convince your manager or your boss, please can we have 6 months to rewrite all our code in Angular 2, right? Put the business first, be an S-class developer and say, I have a better solution. Let's use the upgrade adapter, start writing new features in Angular 2 so that we're not falling behind, keep all our old product, run them side by side. You will save companies millions of dollars this way. Just be sure to credit me, and I will give you my email address where you can send checks later. Okay. Angular 1 component. This is a directive. It's a function. It has an isolate scope. We're doing a bind to controller to set some things up on our isolate scope. We've declared our template, our controller, and our controller as. This has all the pieces of an Angular 2 component right there. If you can write this code, you're pretty much there. Okay, in summary, Ryan was giving me this, and I'm like, last slide. All right, okay. I'm excited about Angular 2 because it is more JavaScript, less Angular. I have been on the development end for years, and nothing is ever constant in development. Languages change, frameworks change, libraries change, jobs change. Using Angular 2 is going to require more JavaScript expertise than using Angular 1, but that is going to make you a better developer, more flexible and more robust. Angular 2 is going to let us use third-party components so much easier because it's more JavaScript. Someone else has JavaScript, we have JavaScript, they play nice. In Angular 1, that was one of the biggest headaches. How do you get a third party to work with what I'm doing in Angular 2? It's going to be a lot more swappable and a lot more modifiable. One of the biggest things is kind of the React scene that I like. React is such a small library that there's been a dozen people trying to solve the same problem, and it's really been a competition of what's best. And we're seeing some really awesome patterns emerge for developing applications. Some of them even, like unidirectional data flow, Angular 2 is now picked up and is using. I'm excited to see that same kind of scene in Angular 2. And I think Angular 1 inhibited that a little bit by being very the Angular way and then the JavaScript way. It will be using a modular component tree structure. It is more explicit and consistent in its syntax. There's still going to be a learning curve to adapt over to it and figure it out. It's not going to be super duper easy peasy. And some of the big things that Angular is keeping that kind of defines Angular among other web libraries: dependency injection for easily swapping things and great and easy testing, declarative template syntax for those that like to write HTML as HTML and not HTML and JavaScript or etc. And a toolbox of a bunch of extra useful things like HTTP and potentially a router and other things. My name is Jeremy Robertson. I'm afraid of social media, mostly because it's a huge distraction for me, and I like to be productive and get stuff done. So, primary way to reach me is Jeremy at DevMountain, and then I will respond to you when I actually have time. Any questions? Yeah, there is a huge, I'm forgetting the name, someone else might be helping, but there is a massive GitHub repository that basically has a TypeScript definition file for almost anything you could want. Definitely typed, thank you. Look up definitely typed, and you will find a TypeScript definition library for just about anything under the sun. It's literally pages and pages of scrolling. Have your Command F ready. Other questions? So, yeah, that's one of the nice things about Angular is it's a lot more just web way of doing things. So a lot of those libraries, if they're not instantly compatible, should be with pretty minimal tweaking. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a bunch of that stuff come along pretty quick, because Angular removed the magic and said, you guys do it. And some developers are going to be like, I want it, I did it, I shared it. Right? How do you change things for people that are really? For people that are really attached. For those that were attached to Angular, one of the reasons I liked Angular 1X, particularly at DevMountain where we teach code, is it gave a pretty easy to follow pattern. Once you followed the pattern, repeated it, and you could make stuff, really cool stuff, pretty robust stuff, right? But Angular 2 is going to force developers in general to be better developers. It's going to force them to keep up with ES6 and ES7, to understand new patterns and approaches. You're going to see, I guarantee you'll see Angular 2 libraries using Redux, right? React's biggest state flow management library right now. You're going to see Angular 2 jQuery libraries where they like jQuery for this part and Angular for this. You're going to see a lot more mashups. So it's going to force Angular developers to really have to understand and be better programmers to be able to keep up with the scene as it's going. And I think that's a good thing. Maybe because I just like seeing people do awesome things and push their potential.
Minification was a problem in Angular 1 if you didn't follow certain patterns. How was Angular 2's approach? Does it have any gotchas like that?
No. Because it pretty much follows the ES6 class style of injection, right? And so it works there, it's going to work here. That's one thing that I really give kudos to the Angular team for, is they went and said, we were doing a lot of patterns very different. We were being the special child library, and where they were willing to say, let's reel it in and let's play nice with everybody else. Let's follow the web patterns, let's do things how other people are doing them, and not try to be this special library on a pedestal. They're fairly interchangeable at this point, right? There are some potentially minor nuances that I'm not comfortable diving into here. But, yeah. The easiest way to think of a component is a mash between a controller and a directive, right? Or that controller inside a directive approach that I showed you a couple slides back, right? That's a component. It's one of those. There's still karma, right? And you use that injectable decorator like we saw when doing services, and that's how you can get your mocks in place to be able to do what you need to mock. And Angular 2 is really big on testing. So there's already a lot of documentation on how to test in Angular 2 on their site. It's a lot more JavaScript, which means it opens up a lot more doors, right? Pretty much I would expect any unit testing library that works with JavaScript and ES6 to work with Angular. And that goes with pretty much any of these like third-party questions. That's one of the things they did. They got rid of Angular's magic, said you do it explicitly, which means third-party or JavaScript anywhere. Pretty seamlessly. It's very powerful. It's more work, but it's very powerful. Okay, congratulations everyone. Thanks for not falling asleep. Have a good one.
Okay, one big round of applause to our sponsors. Once again, dinner from Workfront and for Adobe for the building. We appreciate them. Okay, a couple things real quick. We're going to do quick communication pods or whatever you want to call them. If anyone wants to talk about hiring or being hired, we're going to do that over here. Just gather over there, talk amongst yourselves. If you're interested in startups, we'll do that in this back corner over here. Actually, no, we should do that by the food. Startup people need food, right? Like hungry? Anyway. If you want like functional JavaScript, Elm, PureScript, Clojure script, any of that, we'll do that over here. What am I missing? Who else wants to talk about something? If you want to sit here all night, just stay where you're at. Anyway, if you want to speak, come talk to me. Love to have you. Other than that, thanks for coming. We appreciate having you.